Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into the sweet hazy murk of a world without clean labels, where getting high meant stumbling across the right plant at the wrong time, or maybe just drinking too much ale with an empty stomach. The hearth is smoking, the hay smells faintly of mildew, and your neighbor swears her headache is gone because she burned something green and weird behind her barn. You probably won't survive this evening if you're the type who needs safety labels, dosage instructions, or any kind of FDA approval. Because in medieval times, there were no warnings, only whispers, trial and error, and occasionally a conversation with a turnip that looked suspiciously like your aunt. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it over there? Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see how far this foggy village spreads. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across packed dirt, smoke from peat fires curling through the air, clinging to your cloak like a damp second skin. Dinner is done, boiled something with cabbage again, and the evening stretches ahead. No phones, no books, no chessboards, unless you're fancy. What people do have, though, are herbs, ale, and an impressive amount of free time. Your neighbor's hut smells odd. A little like thyme, a little like burnt onion, and a little like she's trying to summon something that walks on two hooves. She invites you in. You crouch inside, where a clump of dried leaves hangs over the fire, crackling softly. She grins with too many teeth and offers you a cup of something vaguely brown. You sip. It's warm, spicy, slightly sweet. And then things get floaty. Welcome to the casual highs of medieval peasant life. Not deliberate, not refined, but frequent. Because when your world is cold, your work is backbreaking, and your bread might contain questionable fungus. Sometimes the line between sober and slightly sideways isn't so strict. Take ergot, for instance, a mold that grew on rye, especially during damp seasons. Historians still argue whether certain outbreaks of cursed bread actually caused mild mass hallucinations or just very bad stomach aches. But we do know ergot has properties that, when ingested, can cause vivid visions, spasms, and a general sense of what is happening to my limbs right now. In fact, a few historians link ergot poisoning to early accounts of bewitchment, especially in cold, damp regions where rye was the main grain. Picture a family in a hut, twitching and ranting about demons, while the bread goes untouched in the corner, quietly fuzzy. But it wasn't all accidents. Ale was the medieval smoothie. Everyone drank it, kids included, because water wasn't always safe. Brewed thick and weak for daily use, strong and spiced for festivals, ale was the social glue of village life. But when the brewer got heavy-handed with the hops, or the fermentation sat a little long, people ended up woozy, weepy, or singing about frogs at full volume. And then there were the intentional brews, herbal infusions laced with plants that had warming effects. Wormwood, mugwort, and wild rosemary were common. One village woman swore by her sleeping tea that involved rose hips and just a sprinkle of henbane, a plant known today for its hallucinogenic effects and for being just toxic enough to make things interesting. You stir by the hearth as someone hands you a little clay pipe. You hesitate. They shrug and say it's just dried elderflower and a touch of valerian. Nothing serious. Good for dreams. You puff once. The smoke curls in your nose like old parchment. There's something inherently hazy about life in this time. Flickering light, uneven sleep, nights where the moonlight bends a little more than it should, and the owls hoot in triplets. When you're exhausted, underfed, and your house is basically a giant compost pile with a roof, the smallest shift in chemistry feels like a revelation. And sometimes people sort it out. Herbalists, often women, kept small gardens filled with feverfew, nightshade, yarrow, and fennel. They'd brew dream drafts to help people sleep. Some worked. Some made you talk to your dead uncle for 3 hours. Some just made you sneeze uncontrollably and then forget your own name until breakfast. One fringe recipe for calming bad humors involved boiling parsley, thyme, a few scrapings of boiled deer antler, and a splash of stale wine. Whether it cured anything is debatable. Whether it made the drinker feel different. Likely. You lean back now, your head light, your limbs loose. The fire dances a little too enthusiastically. The shadows in the corner of the hut seem to be discussing something in whispers. You blink slowly, and you realize, in a world full of superstition, scarcity, and hard labor, the occasional trip into the strange wasn't just welcome, it was essential. Because when the body aches and the mind is caged, even a modest mug of ale, a pipe of herbs, or a tea from a half-forgotten recipe could feel like a window cracking open in your head. You didn't call it getting high. You called it coping. The morning after a festival in the monastery feels a lot like waking up inside a wine barrel. Your head is full of wool, the air reeks of yeast and old candle wax, and someone in the corridor is softly chanting psalms like they're trying to cleanse the hangover out of the walls. You shuffle out of bed, technically a straw-filled mattress sack, and try to remember exactly how many mugs of that monastic ale you had last night. 2? 5? 12? Did someone bless the keg before the second round or after Brother Cedric tried to sing falsetto? The line between religion and inebriation in medieval monasteries was surprisingly fuzzy. While monks were expected to live sober, contemplative lives, they were also the best brewers in town. Not out of rebellion, but practicality. Monasteries had land, time, and recipes, passed down in quiet Latin notations scrawled into the margins of psalters. Brewing was a sacred duty. It sustained the brethren, welcomed travelers, and brought in donations. And sometimes it brought on visions, or at least vivid dreams that may or may not have involved talking sheep in choir robes. Historians still argue whether some of these holy experiences were truly divine, or simply the side effects of a strong second batch aged a little too long in a damp cellar. You make your way to the refectory, eyes squinting against the stained glass light. A warm mug of ale is placed in your hands. It's not quite breakfast, but it is standard protocol. Monks, after all, had an ale allowance. Some drank up to 1 gallon a day, though diluted. And on feast days, all bets were off. The ale isn't just refreshing. It's thick, rich, malty, sometimes spiced with herbs like groot, or even medicinal additives. And yes, depending on who brewed it, some batches could absolutely put you on your knees, spiritually and literally. One fringe record from a 13th century German abbey tells of a monk who became so lifted in soul after 3 mugs of festival ale that he climbed the bell tower and declared the end of Lent. The punishment? Scrubbing floors for a month and reading only Leviticus. You sip cautiously. The paradox was this: monks weren't trying to get drunk. But in an age where water could kill you and bread wasn't always enough, ale was medicine, sustenance, and sacrament. And sometimes the fermentation went a bit further than planned. Add in the herbs and roots, many added for flavor or health, but with dubious consequences, and the average mug might make you feel closer to God or to the floor. And this wasn't limited to monks. Nuns, too, brewed. In some convents, They maintained their own ale recipes, with notes on which herbs soothed melancholy and which lightened the spirit. One even referenced a small addition of holy poppy, meant for insomnia, but occasionally leading to some very confusing morning prayers. You recall how in one particularly sleepy order, the nuns nicknamed their strongest brew the cloister collapse. It was only served on feast days, and only after vespers, presumably to avoid the embarrassing combination of inebriation and Gregorian chant. But not every drink was divine. Some monks sought ecstasy without the cup, through fasting, chanting, sleeplessness, and long hours in candlelit prayer. Add a mild fever, a cramped stone cell, and 2 decades of spiritual longing, and it's easy to see how visions began. And still, brewing continued. Monasteries refined their processes. Some exported barrels to nearby villages. Others guarded their recipes as tightly as their relics. Ale became both industry and indulgence. You begin to suspect that behind all the solemn vows and stern faces, there was an underground joy, a bubbling stream of laughter, warmth, and maybe a slightly tipsy version of community. Shared drinks, shared stories, a shared understanding that the divine didn't always whisper from the heavens. Sometimes it giggled from the bottom of a wooden mug. Not everyone approved, of course. There were always reformers, stern-faced monks who warned that even mild intoxication could lead to sin. That joy was a slippery slope, that the soul must remain alert at all times. But even they couldn't resist a sip when the feast bell rang. And so the contradiction lived on. Monks who fasted and drank, who prayed and brewed, who sought heaven, while also quietly perfecting the ideal fermentation process. You sit now at the edge of the cloister garden, the last drops of ale warm in your cup. Bees hum nearby. The scent of lavender drifts on the air. Somewhere inside, someone is softly singing, not a hymn this time, but a drinking song in Latin. You close your eyes and smile, because in this cloister, sainthood and buzzed contentment weren't mutually exclusive. You wander into the woods at twilight, leaves crunching softly beneath your boots, and a light mist curling around your ankles like it has secrets to tell. A crow watches you from a low branch, too still to be just a crow. You're not entirely sure what you're looking for, but the woman with the thick braids and the woven belt back in town said, "Follow the ash trees and listen for the frogs. You'll know when you're close." And now the frogs are singing in stereo. You step into a clearing, heart thudding with just enough curiosity to override common sense. A fire burns low in the middle of a ring of stones. Bundles of herbs hang from a tree limb overhead. A mortar and pestle sit half-buried in moss. And beside them, a small clay pot, open, glistening faintly in the firelight. The smell hits you first, sharp, sweet, earthy, and a little dangerous. Like a garden that bites back. This, apparently, is flying ointment. You've heard the rumors. Stories of witches who smeared themselves with strange balms and rode broomsticks across the sky, dancing with the devil or slipping into strange realms where the rules of gravity and guilt no longer applied. Historians still argue whether these flights were real, symbolic, or induced by, well, some very vivid ingredients. Because the truth is, some medieval witches, often just women with deep herbal knowledge, created salves and ointments from plants like henbane, mandrake, belladonna, and datura. All of them have hallucinogenic properties. All of them, in the right dose, could push the mind far from the body, and applied not by mouth, but through the skin. Or more specifically, to areas with lots of blood vessels, the groin, the armpits, the temples, somewhere private, somewhere efficient. You crouch beside the clay pot and imagine dipping your fingers in, smearing a line across your wrist, closing your eyes, and waking up weightless. The legend of witches flying isn't just about travel. It's about escape from poverty, from oppression, from the unrelenting grind of village life. The broom wasn't just a cleaning tool. It was a symbol of power, control, maybe even rebellion. And when paired with a bit of herbal grease, suddenly it soared. One fringe folktale describes a woman in Bohemia who claimed she could turn into a hare if she rubbed her legs with moon slick. Was it balm? Was it myth? Was it an excuse for why she kept vanishing on full moon nights and returning with burrs in her hair? You may never know. You look again at the clearing and realize how easily fear crept into the picture. A woman alone in the woods, a strange plant, a trance. To some, she's a healer. To others, she's a threat. Because the line between medicine and magic, between visionary and heretic, was razor thin. And the ointment. It may have caused real sensations, flying, floating, talking to spirits, seeing the world shift and shimmer. But it also came with real danger. The dosage was imprecise. Some never woke. Others woke changed. Still, people kept seeking it out. Desperation breeds invention. And sometimes, invention gets sticky. The church, of course, tried to crack down. Witch trials often involved testimony about flying at night, attending Sabbaths, or using unholy oils. Whether the accused actually experienced these things, or simply frightened the wrong neighbor, remains murky. But the folklore persisted. Even in places where belief in magic waned, stories remained. Of midnight rides, of potion-laced dreams, of ointments that let you walk through walls and kiss the stars. And while many medieval people genuinely feared these tales, just as many whispered about them with a flicker of envy. Because the idea of flying, leaving behind the chores, the rules, the endless churn of survival, that was a fantasy too rich to ignore. You imagine smearing the ointment on your skin and feeling the air lift you, not like a bird, but like a breath held too long, finally released. Up you go, above the thatched roofs, above the church steeple, above the rules. Maybe you land in a place full of song and freedom. Maybe you land in the same forest, hours later, covered in dirt and laughing at a tree. Or maybe you never land at all. Because what the ointment gave wasn't necessarily flight, it was possibility. A way to leave, even just for a moment, the narrow path laid out for you. A chance to dance barefoot under the moon with no name, no shame, and no chores waiting when you came back down. You stand slowly, the fire now low, the air cool against your neck. You didn't touch the ointment, not tonight, but you feel its pull. The promise it made to so many before you, not just to rise, but to slip the tether. The village apothecary always smells the same. Something between damp straw, licorice, and boiled socks. You push open the creaky wooden door and step into a room that looks like it's trying very hard to stay organized, but gave up sometime last harvest. Glass vials crowd the shelves, their contents cloudy, bubbling, or ominously still. Bundles of dried herbs hang like bats from the rafters. Somewhere in the back, a mortar and pestle clink with slow, deliberate rhythm. And in the center of it all, poppy juice. Or, as the apothecary calls it, sweet sleep. Though you've also heard it whispered as God's forgetfulness and dream syrup. You're here not because you're sick, but because your neighbor's back pain vanished overnight, and she's now convinced her apothecary's special brew could make her husband stop talking in his sleep. You're skeptical, but curious. The apothecary eyes you from behind a curtain of fennel stalks. They've got a look that says, I've seen some things, but also, I've mixed worse. They reach up, pluck a little clay jar from the shelf and uncork it. The scent hits you, a dark, earthy sweetness, like honey left too long in the sun. Just a drop, they say. Poppy juice, or more precisely, the extract of Papaver somniferum, was one of medieval medicine's most trusted and trickiest tools. Known to soothe pain, quiet nerves, and lull restless sleepers, it also came with a hefty side order of addiction, dependency, and occasionally forgetting your name mid-sentence. Historians still argue how widely it was used among common folk. The literate elite, monks, physicians, noble households, certainly recorded its uses. But oral tradition suggests even peasants knew where to find wild poppies and how to steep the dried heads into tea or mash them into paste. You run a finger along the rim of the jar. It glistens. Medieval doctors, if you could call them that, believed strongly in the balance of humors. Too much black bile? You're melancholic. Too much yellow bile? Angry. Sleep too shallow? Clearly your phlegm is misbehaving. Poppy juice was the great equalizer, cooling and moist, in medical terms, which, in a world obsessed with dryness and heat, was practically a spa day in a bottle. But dosing. Good luck. One fringe text describes using a single poppy seed, steeped in wine, to calm a baby. Another says to boil 20 poppy heads with vinegar, then mix with goat's milk and fennel. One gives the extremely helpful instruction: use only enough to see God, not enough to join him. Even in the most esteemed hospitals, like those run by monks, dosages were guessed. People often drifted into sleep that lasted hours or days. Sometimes they didn't wake up at all, and yet people kept taking it. Because medieval life was painful, you plowed with blisters, slept on straw, bore children on dirt floors, and pulled your own teeth with twine. Pain relief wasn't luxury. It was survival. You sip carefully. The apothecary raises an eyebrow. You feel a slow warmth start at the back of your tongue. Not unpleasant, not instant, just softening. Like the world took off its heavy wool cloak and settled into something looser. And not just for the sick. People used poppy in rituals, dreams, and even romance. A young woman might steep it into a tea for her betrothed to ease his nerves, or make him too drowsy to notice her confession about that month she missed. Soldiers drank it before battle. Mothers gave it to crying babies. Grieving widows took it to sleep through sorrow. One unusual case comes from a coastal village where the local midwife combined poppy syrup with fish oil and rubbed it on the soles of laboring women's feet. It draws the pain downward, she explained. Whether it worked or not, she swore by it, and had 11 grandchildren, all delivered by her own hands. But not everyone welcomed the poppy. The church, suspicious of anything that dulled the senses too much, warned against false dreams and artificial stillness. After all, sleep was a liminal state, a bridge between this world and the next. Meddling with it could mean trouble, or temptation. Some theologians claimed the devil himself lived in sleep too deep. That to drift too far was to let him whisper in your dreams, sowing lies, fear, lust. Others disagreed. To some mystics, poppy dreams brought visions of angels, saints, even the Virgin Mary herself, offering a cool cloth to a sweating forehead. Was it divine? Was it just the juice? Hard to say. Even now, sitting in this warm, cluttered apothecary, your eyes feel heavier. The flickering fire in the hearth starts to smear at the edges. The glass bottles seem to glow from within. And somewhere, distantly, you think you hear a lute. Or is it your own heartbeat slowing? You blink. The apothecary is writing something down, probably the dosage. though whether it's for safety or amusement, you're not sure. You rise to leave, limbs slow but satisfied. Your pouch is a little lighter now, a small clay jar inside. Just enough for bad nights, you told them. But secretly, you know you'll try it again. Not to forget, but to drift. Just a little further. You're crouched in the woods, your fingers freezing, and your stomach growling. Foraging, they said. A lovely, wholesome medieval tradition. But you've been out here for hours, and the only thing you've found is a rock shaped like a chicken. Until now. A patch of mushrooms nestles beneath a fallen log, glowing faintly in the damp shade. Some are white, some are brown. One has little red dots, and one of them might be smiling at you, or maybe you're just hungry. Mushroom foraging in the Middle Ages was less science, more desperate guessing. No guidebooks, no online forums, just folklore, trial and error, and the occasional fever dream involving snakes made of light. You reach out and pluck one. This was how it often began, accidental highs, caused by the simple act of eating the wrong mushroom. Or, depending on your perspective, the right mushroom. Fly agaric, that red-capped beauty with white spots, was a favorite among folk healers, trickster stories, and weird monks with too much free time. Though toxic in high doses, properly prepared it caused intense, dreamlike states, full of colors and strange sensations. Historians still argue whether medieval Europeans actually consumed it intentionally, or just kept encountering it in woodland confusion. Then there was psilocybin, the magic mushroom of modern fame. Medieval records rarely name it outright, possibly due to fear, censorship, or just linguistic inconsistency, but scattered descriptions hint at laughing fits, visions of long worms in the sky, and conversations with God through the floor. You bite down on a cooked bit of the fungus, offered by a friendly old woman in a bark cloak. She says it'll help you see clearer, which is ironic, because everything is now slightly fuzzy. Some believed these mushrooms had spiritual value, that they opened doors in the mind, that they allowed peasants to glimpse truths hidden by daylight and duty. Others just knew they made the endless cycle of planting, praying, and aching a little more bearable. One fringed tale tells of a shepherd boy who swore a mushroom led him to a secret field where time ran backwards and his sheep recited psalms. He became a monk, never smiled again. But it wasn't just about mushrooms. There were other plants, roots and seeds. Darnel, a weed that grew among wheat and sometimes caused drunken staggering when baked into bread. Some called it false wheat, others the devil's barley. It made people giddy, dizzy, forgetful. It was common enough that villagers simply shrugged and said, "Ah, bad loaf." Imagine a feast where the bread's gone a little funky, the stew includes unknown mushrooms, and the wine was stored next to the fireplace for a month. That's not dinner. That's a psychedelic journey waiting to happen. And it did happen. Accounts of mass delusions, strange dancing fits, and feast hallucinations dot medieval chronicles. Were they caused by spoiled food? Ergot-infected rye? Low blood sugar and high imagination? Nobody agrees. But one particular incident stands out. A village in what is now France where, after a local wedding, nearly 30 people reported visions of angels and winged goats during dinner. The goat was wearing a crown and reportedly blessed the soup. The local priest declared it divine intervention. The bride declared it the best day of her life. The groom had no memory whatsoever. Back in your own mushroom haze, you begin to understand. The edges of your vision shimmer. The firelight pulses in slow, contented waves. The old woman hums a tune without a melody. You're pretty sure the moss is breathing. It's not terrifying. It's not glorious. It's just altered. A shift. A moment when the ordinary folds into something quieter, stranger, and more forgiving. In a world where pain was constant, expectations relentless, and the afterlife a looming specter, a moment like this wasn't indulgence. It was respite. That didn't mean people didn't suffer consequences. Some never came back from a bad batch. Some poisoned entire households. Some wandered into the woods and returned convinced they'd seen Judgment Day or had lunch with St. Jerome. But others came back with stories, visions, new songs, wild laughter. They came back a little different, and sometimes, in villages that lacked medicine or hope, that was enough to make the risk worthwhile. You lie back on the damp earth, eyes blinking up at stars that now seem to hum. Your body sinks, your mind floats. Somewhere, someone calls your name, but it's your grandmother's voice, and she's been gone for years. You smile. Because tonight, through fungi and folklore, you've joined the long line of medieval minds who by accident or design slipped the leash of logic for a little while. And honestly, the leash wasn't all that comfortable anyway. It starts with a foot tapping. Just one. A little rhythm that doesn't seem like much at first. Then it spreads, up the leg, across the square, down the cobbled street. Before you know it, half the town is dancing. And they won't stop. You stand at the edge of the crowd, clutching a half-eaten plum, watching as your neighbors twist and jump, their faces slack with exhaustion, but their limbs possessed. The baker's wife is spinning in circles. The old man who usually curses the rain is doing something that could generously be called jazz hands. This is the dancing plague, and it's not a party. In the summer of 1518, in Strasbourg, dozens of people danced uncontrollably for days. They collapsed from exhaustion. Some even died. It sounds like myth, but it's in the records, civic notes, physicians' logs, even concerned letters to bishops. Historians still argue what caused it. Some blame mass hysteria, a psychological release valve triggered by famine, stress, or sheer hopelessness. Others point to ergot-contaminated rye, that pesky hallucinogenic mold that made a surprise appearance in your bread bowl 2 sections ago. And then there are those who think it was a mix, bad food, bad vibes, and a town one unpaid tax bill away from snapping. You take a step back as a dancer nearly collides with you, her eyes wide, her breath ragged, her feet black with grime. She doesn't even seem to notice. It's like she's chasing something only she can see. A local priest stands nearby, reading aloud, hoping that scripture might snap the spell. A drummer has joined in, perhaps thinking he's helping. You're not sure if the rhythm is feeding the madness or keeping it from breaking entirely. But Strasbourg wasn't the only case. Throughout the medieval world, groups of people occasionally lost control, usually dancing, sometimes weeping or laughing, and always with an eerie sense of shared delirium. These weren't isolated fits. They were group affairs, ecstatic, exhausting, and profoundly confusing. One fringe account from a Swiss village in the late 1300s claims that a group of children danced from one town to another, mouths open in silent song, until they collapsed in a field of poppies. The poppies weren't even in bloom. The parents built a shrine there anyway. Back in Strasbourg, the city council is panicking. They've ruled out demons. They've ruled out joy. Now they're trying something radical. They hire musicians and set up a stage. They're thinking, maybe the dancers just need to dance it out. Like a weird medieval version of musical therapy. So the town provides a hall. Musicians play. People collapse in piles. Some recover, some don't. It's unclear if it helps, or just organizes the chaos. You watch as one of the dancers begins to slow, his legs giving out beneath him. A woman catches him before he hits the ground. They don't speak. They just hold each other, breathing hard, like they've just run a marathon they didn't sign up for. And maybe they have. Because no one really chooses this. These aren't festive jigs or tavern reels. They're movements without meaning, frantic and unrelenting. The kind of dancing that comes from somewhere deeper, a mind untethered, a body that doesn't care about reason anymore. And that's the thing. In medieval times, when life pressed in from all sides, plague, taxes, hunger, the occasional Viking, people didn't always break quietly. Sometimes they broke together. Whether it was rye mold, trauma, or communal trance, the dancing plagues tell us something important, that under the right or wrong conditions, the mind and body might do anything to escape. Even if that means flinging yourself across a town square with no plan, no shoes, and no idea what beat you're following. You sit now on the edge of a crumbling fountain. The dancers are thinning. The priest has given up. The drummer's arms are heavy. The sky is beginning to pinken with dawn, and somewhere a rooster crows, as if to remind everyone that time hasn't stopped, even if they did. A girl passes by, barefoot and blinking like she just woke up. Her lips twitch into a tired smile. Then she vanishes into an alley. You wonder if she remembers any of it. You wonder if she wants to. And you think, maybe this too was a kind of getting high. Not from a substance, but from something inside, something that broke loose and ran until the legs gave out and the soul could breathe again. You stretch your own legs, still solid, still yours. For now, the scent hits you before the camel's hooves stop, sweet, smoky, and earthy, like pine needles left on a hot stone. You're at a desert outpost, halfway between a bustling bazaar and a very bored goat. The air is dry, the sun unforgiving, and the trader in front of you, cloaked in linen and secrets, is unpacking little black bricks wrapped in waxed cloth. Hashish. You've heard whispers about it from travelers, a strange, tarry substance smoked or chewed in distant lands, known to induce laughter, visions, or silence, depending on who you ask. And now, here it is, cradled in the palm of a man who claims to have seen lions bow to kings and rivers run backward. You're not sure if it's the heat or the hashish talking. Hashish, derived from the resin of the cannabis plant, was used widely in parts of the Islamic world as early as the 9th century. While alcohol was forbidden in most interpretations of Sharia, hashish carved out a curious space, technically not wine, definitely not grape, and open to debate. Historians still argue whether medieval Islamic societies embraced hashish as a spiritual aid or condemned it outright as sinful escapism. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. Sufi mystics, for example, sometimes used it in ritual contemplation, claiming it quieted the self and revealed divine light. Meanwhile, city authorities occasionally punished its sale with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for actual heresy. But the hashish tales didn't stay in the East. They traveled. Along the Silk Road, on spice caravans, with returning crusaders and wandering scholars. In time, stories of mystical substances that could open your mind or loosen your grip on reality reached European ears. Sometimes literally. A Genoese sailor reportedly returned from Alexandria, insisting the local green smoke allowed him to converse with dolphins. He was promoted to lighthouse keeper shortly after. Europeans, especially those near port cities, became fascinated. They didn't quite understand what hashish was, but they loved talking about it. Writers described it as a mind herb, a paradise crumb, or Satan's spice rack. One fringe tale even claims a knight once swapped his sword for a handful of hashish and spent the next 3 weeks trying to joust shadows. Did these stories spark fear? Absolutely, Did they also spark curiosity? Oh yes. In some alchemical texts, resins from the East appear in lists of ingredients for elixirs of insight or sleep of awakening, suggesting that cannabis extracts were at least known, if not fully understood. And among the more adventurous, reckless European apothecaries, rumors of the substance's effects led to quiet experiments. You duck into a tent lined with colorful rugs. Inside, a brazier glows softly, releasing that unmistakable scent. A traveler motions for you to sit. He speaks of long nights under the stars, where the mind stretches like a cat in sun, and time becomes an old friend who forgets your name. You take a cautious puff. The taste is bitter thick. Your lungs protest. But slowly, the edges of the world soften. You lean back, and the stars seem closer somehow. Hashish isn't like ale. It doesn't shout. It whispers. You hear music with no source, feel memories from childhood sharpen unexpectedly, and begin to suspect that your sandals have become philosophers. They're telling you something about patience and gravel, but you're not quite following. And while this may sound ridiculous, you're not alone. Many who used hashish in medieval contexts reported shifts in perception, deep introspection, or fits of laughter that lasted hours. One Cairo scholar wrote that after consuming hashish, he was able to memorize 4 books in a week, but couldn't remember where he'd left his shoes for 3 months. Not everyone was enchanted. Some moralists declared hashish the enemy of discipline. They claimed it made men lazy, women bold, and goats strangely confident. The church, hearing distant echoes of these stories, lumped it in with witchcraft, devilry, or things best not imported. And yet, the tales continued. Of nights spent floating above the desert, of conversations with invisible friends, of an inner garden where truth grew like vines and laughter watered the soil. You open your eyes. The fire in the brazier has dimmed. The stars blink innocently overhead. The trader sips tea as if nothing unusual has happened. He smiles at you with the knowing look of someone who's already been where you just went and packed a lunch. You rise, a little dizzy, a little wiser. Not every medieval high came from homegrown herbs or accident. Some were carried across continents, tucked in saddlebags and whispered over borders. And whether accepted or feared, they left their mark on stories, on senses, on the quiet corners of the medieval mind that still longed, even then, to drift away from the ordinary. You step outside the tent, and for a moment, the moon grins. You're lying flat on a table that smells like garlic, tallow, and someone else's anxiety. The doctor, hovering above you, is holding a curved iron spoon in one hand and a bunch of crushed herbs in the other. His beard is magnificent, his eyebrows are untrustworthy, and the walls are covered in woodcuts of saints doing things you're pretty sure violate basic anatomy. Welcome to medieval medicine, that wonderfully unpredictable blend of theory, prayer, and accidental psychedelia. Today's remedy? Something for your nerves, or melancholy, or possibly a headache. It's never quite clear which humor is out of balance, but the solution is always the same: herbs that make your thoughts slippery. The physician begins to chant softly. You're not sure if it's Latin or just his lunch repeating. He sprinkles powdered mandrake root into a cup of wine and stirs with a spoon that looks recently repurposed from a candle holder. You sip, then blink. Then the ceiling moves slightly. Not a lot, just enough to suggest that it's reconsidering its architectural choices. Mandrake, you've heard, has a scream that kills. That's the myth, anyway. In reality, it's a powerful plant that contains alkaloids capable of inducing hallucinations, sedation, and sometimes complete dissociation. Medieval doctors used it in everything from surgical anesthesia to exorcisms. Historians still argue whether patients truly slept under mandrake's influence or simply drifted into a semi-conscious fugue state where pain felt far away and time got lost under the bed. But mandrake wasn't alone. The deadly nightshade family, belladonna, henbane, datura, featured heavily in medical manuals. A bit to numb pain, a bit more to induce dreams. Too much, and you might start chatting with your shadow, convinced it's your cousin Jeff. You feel that familiar softening behind your eyes. Not unpleasant, just less tethered. The physician mutters something about unlocking the spirit's cage, then offers a small leather pouch of dried leaves as a follow-up dose. Belladonna was used to dilate pupils, but it also earned the name Beautiful Woman because of how it enhanced a dreamy gaze. Never mind that it could also cause confusion, dry mouth, and talking to windows, like they owed you rent. In one fringe monastery, monks used a combination of hyoscyamus and prayer to induce visions. One poor brother insisted he'd been visited by St. Augustine and a talking goat. The goat's advice was excellent. Augustine's was mostly about porridge. These herbal highs weren't recreational, not officially. They were framed as medical, spiritual, or necessary. But everyone knew the line blurred. A patient given mandrake might weep with joy, or see angels, or believe their left foot was plotting something. Still, they asked for it, again and again. Why? Because surgery hurt, childbirth hurt, plague hurt, grief hurt, and there were no safe words in the 1300s. Just faith, distraction, or plants that made the world wobble. And sometimes, patients got better. Sometimes the high brought relief, clarity, even joy. In a London hospital ledger, one surgeon noted a woman who smiled for 3 days after the poultice. The poultice, it turns out, included poppy, vinegar, and a generous helping of henbane. Was it medicine? Was it magic? No one agreed. No one cared. You try to sit up, but your limbs have forgotten which direction is forward. You lie back down. The ceiling tiles, are they still tiles, now resemble drifting boats on a slow river. You hear a distant bell and wonder briefly if it's real. Then a voice. The physician again. He tells you to rest. The herbs will wear off by dawn. Unless they don't. You laugh. It comes out like a hiccup wrapped in a hymn. These medicinal trips weren't without danger. Some patients never recovered. Some lost weeks. Some were declared touched, blessed, or cursed, depending on the political climate. Yet the tools remained. Doctors kept using them. Patients kept asking. You imagine medieval scholars at candlelit desks, squinting at leaf drawings and muttering about dosage, while casually writing side notes like produced visions of fire geese or patient attempted to marry chamber pot. Science was young. Curiosity was reckless. Pain was constant. And so the pursuit of relief, even if it meant dancing on the edge of reason, was deeply human. You close your eyes. Behind your lids, shapes move. They aren't frightening. They aren't clear. Just soft lights and gentle sounds, like wind chimes caught in honey. You feel yourself drift, not just from the room, but from the ache in your bones, the weight on your chest, the noise of the day. The herbs don't fix anything, but they loosen something. And maybe that's enough. The physician's chant fades into humming. You lie still, floating somewhere between a prayer and a poem. And for the first time in weeks, you're not in pain. You're kneeling on cold stone, the smell of beeswax and incense curling around your nostrils like a slow hymn. Your hands rest in your lap, but your eyes are fixed on the nun at the altar, who has not blinked in, well, at least 5 full prayers. Her face glows with some mix of candlelight and something else, rapture maybe, or mushrooms. You're not ruling either out. In the flickering quiet of the medieval monastery, People weren't just praying. They were hallucinating. Or so some of them swore. Visions were surprisingly common in the lives of saints and mystics, floating above their beds, glowing with inner fire, speaking languages they'd never studied. And not just the famous ones: Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, Catherine of Siena, but also countless local visionaries, some of whom couldn't read, couldn't write, and couldn't quite explain why their bread started talking last Thursday. Historians still argue whether these experiences were genuinely spiritual, medically induced, or the side effects of fasting, fever, and possibly a little bad rye bread. One scholar refers to it as God's accidental chemistry set. You shift in your seat as the nun begins to speak, not with words, but with sound, a rising hum, like wind passing through reeds. Her body sways, then stills, and then she levitates, not dramatically, just a few inches, enough to make your jaw quietly unhinge. But this wasn't uncommon. Many mystics were reported to have experienced ecstatic trances, which sometimes included floating, glowing, or being surrounded by invisible birds. Were these miracles, mass hallucinations, or well-timed coincidences? Some of them fasted to the point of physical collapse. Some inhaled the smoke of burning herbs. Some consumed odd substances under the guise of sacramental offerings. One fringe nun in southern Italy reportedly mixed her communion wine with crushed violets and powder from the sacred well, which suspiciously matched the color of local mold. The church, meanwhile, had a complicated relationship with these mystical highs. On one hand, a levitating nun was great PR. On the other, a woman who claimed God told her that bishops were obsolete was, less convenient. So mystics walked a tightrope, respected, revered, and quietly monitored. Take Hildegard of Bingen, who documented her visions in swirling, glowing imagery that looked like medieval mandalas. Scholars believe she may have suffered from migraines with aura, which could have accounted for the intense light and geometric patterns she described. But that didn't stop the church from canonizing her centuries later. You close your eyes. It's easy to imagine a young woman, locked away in cloistered silence, her meals sparse, her world narrow, her mind turning inward. In that kind of sensory vacuum, almost anything could begin to glow. A crack in the wall becomes a doorway. The breeze becomes a voice. Your own heartbeat becomes a chorus of angels. These weren't recreational highs. They were seen as divine encounters, but they followed familiar patterns, altered time, vivid visuals, detachment from the body, intense emotion. Just without the bonfire and dancing goat we saw back in Section 6. One monk in Bavaria reportedly wept uncontrollably for 7 days after tasting the breath of God during a midnight vigil. Another claimed that during silent prayer, a giant hand of light lifted him above the altar and whispered the names of unborn kings. He forgot all but one of them. Still, not all visions were peaceful. Some mystics described terrifying imagery, demons, floods, burning towers, screaming animals with too many eyes. Whether interpreted as warnings, punishments, or just overly vivid subconscious material, these darker visions were seen as trials of faith. And yet the visionaries returned. Again and again they fasted, prayed, meditated, inhaled herbs, and opened themselves to whatever lay beyond the veil. Because in a world ruled by strict social roles and cosmic fear, the mystic path was one of the few ways an ordinary person could access the extraordinary. You open your eyes. The nun has stopped humming. She kneels again, her face calm. A single tear tracks down her cheek. No one applauds. No one questions it. They just bow their heads. You do too, because whether divine or chemical, hallucination or miracle, something happened here. And sometimes, belief is its own kind of high. You're walking through a marketplace that smells like roasted onions and unwashed ambition. Chickens dart between ankles, a toothless piper plays something that might be music, and the apothecary's stall is stacked high with dried lizards, crushed beetles, and bottles promising dreams, visions, and pleasant forgetfulness. Ah yes, potions. Not quite medicine, not quite poison. Entirely medieval. A young man in a blue tunic is bartering loudly for something called shepherd's calm. The label reads, "For nights when wolves howl louder than thoughts." It's probably valerian root, or maybe wine with extra storytelling. The truth is, the line between potion and drug was paper thin. Medieval Europe had no FDA, no ingredient transparency, and a very relaxed attitude toward what constituted safe for consumption. If it didn't kill your neighbor, it was fine. So, people drank potions for everything: love, sleep, visions, luck, fertility, forgetfulness, bravery, and of course, revenge. Each concoction had its own smell, color, and lore. The base was often wine or ale, the rest a mystery. You stop at a booth where a woman in a green veil stirs a cauldron over a low flame. She offers you a cup, steam rising from its rim in lazy spirals. "For clarity," she says. "You don't ask what's in it, no one ever does." One sip. The taste is floral, sharp, and a little like licking a church pew. And yet, almost instantly, you feel a curious shift. Not light-headed, but loose. Like thoughts are easier to catch, but harder to hold. This was the everyday high of the common folk. Not the trances of monks or witches, not the hallucinogens of travelers, but the humble, handcrafted brew to take the edge off. Potions weren't about escape. They were about softening the world just enough to bear it. Historians still argue how much of potion lore was rooted in real pharmacology and how much was suggestion. But placebo or not, people believed. They wanted to believe. Take the potion of the Blue Lady, sold across northern towns. It claimed to invite dreams of distant shores and gently silence your regrets. Later studies, by very bored monks, suggested it was nothing more than lavender, mint, and fermented pear. But users insisted they saw stars dancing or heard their dead relatives singing lullabies. One man swore he met his future wife in a dream and found her, 2 villages over, a year later. She had the same birthmark, and a stubborn goat. Another popular concoction. The merchant's courage, said to give confidence before trade deals or arranged marriages. Ingredients: nutmeg, clove, honey, and just enough poppy juice to blur your fear into charm. Then there were aphrodisiac brews, like Stag's Delight or Venus's Breath. The recipes were deeply suspicious, mostly radish, cinnamon, maybe goat sweat, but the results? Enthusiastic. Some even worked, or seemed to. Maybe love is just well-placed suggestion and a little mint oil. And of course, there were forgetting potions. These were the quiet bestsellers, taken after heartbreak, or bad harvests, or funerals. To still the memory's wheel, one label read, often a mix of alcohol, valerian, mugwort, and opium resin. They didn't erase grief, but for a night, they muffled it. You sip again. The woman smiles. She doesn't ask what you're trying to forget. She knows better. Potions were also tools of ritual and folklore. Midwives gave laboring women easing brews. Hunters took forest drinks to see better in the dark, usually containing eye-dilating belladonna and resulting in seeing too much, including the forest whispering their names. Sailors drank storm wardens, which were basically rum and prayer. In one fringe community in the mountains, the local priest blessed every potion sold after tasting it. He claimed divine discernment, but probably just liked the gig. One of his sermons reportedly included a very emotional ode to beeswax and a long tangent about clouds being God's soup. Yet the demand never stopped, because medieval life was constant calculation between pain and purpose, duty and desire, memory and madness. And potions offered a shortcut, however temporary. A detour, a breather. You hand the cup back. The woman nods solemnly, then turns to serve the next customer, an elderly man with a limp and a small grin. He asks for Old Bones' rest. She pours without a word. You walk on, the marketplace now just slightly softer around the edges, the shadows friendlier, the noise dulled to a warm murmur. That's what a good potion did, not an escape from reality, just a dimmer switch. You're sitting in a tavern that leans slightly to the left, as if it once tried to flee the village and gave up halfway. The air is thick with smoke, stew, and the unmistakable tang of cheap wine poured too enthusiastically. Behind you, someone laughs like a sack of gravel being shaken, and at the next table, two men are arguing whether their third friend is passed out or simply pondering the meaning of bread. Welcome to the medieval drinking den, where ale isn't just a beverage. It's a lifestyle. And tonight, someone has brought out the strong stuff. You glance down at your cup, which contains something brown, frothy, and a little too enthusiastic. It's been referred to as God's Slipper, Abbey Thunder, and once, by a man who now lives in a barrel, Memory Bleach. Alcohol wasn't new in the Middle Ages. But what it meant to people, that was far more layered than just getting tipsy. Monks brewed some of the best booze in Europe, meticulously refining beer and wine, not just as sacramental offerings, but as a way to fund abbeys and, let's be honest, keep the cloisters from going completely mad. Their beer was strong, dark, and dangerously delicious. Historians still argue whether monks knew just how intoxicating their nutritional beverages were, or whether they genuinely believed God wanted them mildly buzzed 7 days a week. You take a sip. It's not bad. Sweet on the front, burn on the back. Your tongue has opinions, but they're slow to form. Ale and wine were safer than water in many places. Rivers ran brown with filth, and wells were hit or miss. A low-alcohol drink was considered hydration, especially for laborers, pregnant women, and children. Yes, medieval kids drank beer, not the hearty pub variety, but a small ale with barely enough alcohol to make a cat blink. Still, it did the job. But when the adults wanted a night to forget, that's when mead, spiced wine, or distilled grain spirits came out. One particularly potent concoction called Friar's Flame was banned in 2 counties after a wedding turned into a spontaneous exorcism, a pig chase, and a 7-person debate about whether geese had souls. You take another sip. Why a warmth spreads through your chest. The room doesn't spin, but it does sway. A man near the fire begins reciting poetry to his own foot. A woman at the bar has started braiding the beard of a stranger who looks absolutely fine with it. This wasn't just drinking. It was a social reset. Feast days, market days, saints' days, all reasons to drink together, to loosen the rigid social norms, to let peasants and priests and potters share a laugh and forget, briefly, that tomorrow involved mud, taxes, and more mud. But alcohol also had its dark corners. Some drank to numb sorrow. Widows, war veterans, those burdened by debts or regrets. The alehouse regulars, as they were called, were both pitied and envied, known for long, slurred stories and the uncanny ability to sleep under any bench. One fringe tale tells of a man named Bernard, who drank so steadily for 20 years that people swore he was half barley. He claimed ale let him speak to birds. His wife claimed it let her ignore him. There were efforts to regulate excessive drinking. Towns imposed curfews, taxed alewives, even declared public drunkenness a sin, or at least an embarrassment. But enforcement was spotty. After all, sometimes the mayor himself was the loudest singer at the tavern. As the night deepens, someone starts singing a ballad about St. Dunstan and a donkey. The lyrics make no sense, the chorus involves a spoon, and everyone joins in with alarming enthusiasm. You're laughing now, not because it's particularly funny, but because the world feels farther away. Lighter, less sharp. And that was the magic of medieval alcohol, not just intoxication, but temporary transformation. A quiet wife became a dancing whirlwind. A shy farmer told bawdy jokes. A burdened soul leaned back, tilted their cup, and remembered how to smile. You lean against the tavern wall. It's sticky. You don't care. The fire crackles. The music warbles. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows at the wrong hour. You'll probably regret this in the morning. But right now, embarrassment. But enforcement was spotty. After all, sometimes the mayor himself was the loudest singer at the tavern. As the night deepens, someone starts singing a ballad about St. Dunstan and a donkey. The lyrics make no sense, the chorus involves a spoon, and everyone joins in with alarming enthusiasm. You're laughing now, not because it's particularly funny, but because the world feels farther away. Lighter, less sharp. And that was the magic of medieval alcohol, not just intoxication, but temporary transformation. A quiet wife became a dancing whirlwind. A shy farmer told bawdy jokes. A burdened soul leaned back, tilted their cup, and remembered how to smile. You lean against the tavern wall. It's sticky. You don't care. The fire crackles. The music warbles. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows at the wrong hour. You'll probably regret this in the morning. But right now, you're warm. You're here. And the world, for once, feels kind. You're in a meadow, lit by starlight, surrounded by a small circle of people wearing cloaks that seem to have been stitched from secrets. One of them is drawing symbols in the dirt with a bone. Another holds a jar of something glowing faintly blue. And in the center, there's a fire, not crackling, but humming. Welcome to the edge of the village and the edge of medieval reality. Tonight, you're not in a tavern or chapel or field. You're in a space between things, where people spoke in whispers, trusted shadows, and sometimes got a little lifted. We're talking witches, cunning folk, hedge healers, and the small army of rural practitioners who worked outside the official channels, and sometimes very much under the influence. Here's the thing, not all medieval highs were accidental. Some were intentional, very intentional. Let's start with flying ointment. Yes, flying. The kind that allegedly let witches soar through the night sky, often naked, sometimes upside down, occasionally on broomsticks. The recipe varied, but common ingredients included belladonna, hemlock, wolfsbane, fat, human or animal, and a healthy disregard for your pulse. Applied to the skin, or in particularly adventurous tales, certain mucous membranes, it could induce sensations of weightlessness, transformation, and intense hallucination. Historians still argue whether flying ointments were actually used or just invented by inquisitors trying to spice up their trial notes. But scattered herbal manuscripts and folklore suggest someone, somewhere, was smearing themselves with stuff that made the world very interesting. One tale from Bavaria tells of a woman who, after applying a certain salve, swore she'd danced in a glass castle with silver deer. She woke up in her neighbor's barn, covered in feathers and missing her left shoe. Intentional or not, the symptoms line up: out-of-body experiences, vivid dreams, disorientation, even time loss. And unlike alcohol or potions, these concoctions weren't just about numbing reality. They were about escaping it altogether, sometimes as part of ritual, sometimes for healing, sometimes just to be somewhere else for a while. You shift in the circle as the woman next to you begins chanting. Her voice is soft, rhythmical, like waves on moss. She tosses herbs into the fire: mugwort, sage, maybe a pinch of datura. The smoke changes color. Or you think it does. It's hard to be sure. Across the meadow, an owl calls, or speaks your name. Again, hard to be sure. Cunning folk were the community's unofficial pharmacists, therapists, and occasional therapists with benefits. They weren't necessarily witches, but they operated on the edges, where folklore and chemistry danced close. Some used trance-inducing brews to diagnose illness or commune with spirits. One fringe practitioner in Cornwall was known for his dream wine, which helped grieving villagers see their lost ones and ask one last question. No one knew what was in it. He died smiling. Others used trance as part of divination or justice rituals, lying in dark rooms, inhaling herb smoke, waiting for dreams or signs. Some swore they could speak with animals. Some swore animals spoke back. One crow, according to legend, gave betting advice. Not all encounters were gentle. These rituals often took a toll on the mind, on the body. Some users never returned to full clarity. Some didn't want to. Some claimed they saw things so beautiful or so terrible they no longer belonged fully to this world. But many emerged stronger, more focused, changed. You look into the fire again. The humming is louder now, like bees in velvet. The leader of the circle sprinkles something from a pouch labeled with a sun and crescent moon. You inhale deeply. It's sharp, bitter, electrifying. The stars blur, then double, and suddenly you remember something you've never known. That's the thing about these folk highs. They blurred the line between healing and transcendence, between medicine and magic, between what was real and what was real enough. Modern science can parse the chemical interactions, name the alkaloids, estimate the dosages. But what it can't fully measure is what these people believed: that the plants were sacred, that the visions were meaningful, that stepping sideways from the world was sometimes the only way to survive it. You lie back in the grass. The firelight flickers behind your eyes. Someone hums beside you, and you hum too. Not because you understand, but because you feel included. Tomorrow, you'll return to chores and silence and the dull ache behind your knees. But tonight, you've flown. Not far, not high, but enough. You're lying on a wooden bench inside a thick-walled room that smells of candle wax, damp stone, and something spicy, maybe cloves, or maybe despair. Monks shuffle silently past, their sandals whispering across the flagstones. One of them pauses, places a small cloth bag under your nose, and walks away without a word. Inside the bag, frankincense, myrrh, maybe crushed rose petals and nutmeg. You blink slowly. Welcome to the medieval sensory chamber, otherwise known as the church. It might not seem obvious at first glance, but medieval religious spaces were engineered to alter your consciousness through light, sound, smell, movement, and sometimes long periods of not eating, not sleeping, and not blinking. Historians still argue whether this was intentional mind alteration or simply the byproduct of piety on a tight budget. But walk through a Gothic cathedral and tell me it doesn't feel like a mild high. Let's start with the incense. Burned in nearly every significant ceremony, it wasn't just to cover the smell of medieval crowds. Incense, especially frankincense and myrrh, has mild psychoactive properties. The rising smoke, the sweet pungency, the rhythm of swinging censers. It could lull you into a trance, especially when combined with chanting that echoed from soaring stone ceilings. You listen now to the monks, deep, layered, vowel-heavy sounds that ripple through your ribs. You don't know the words. It doesn't matter. The Gregorian chant works like water over stone, softening edges, slowing thoughts. A study centuries later would suggest certain frequencies in chant could trigger meditative brain states. But you don't need science right now. You need stillness. And you're getting it. This is a church high, not ecstatic like the mystics, not herb-induced like the potioners, but a sensory recalibration brought on by sacred architecture, intentional ritual, and maybe just a little hypoxia from kneeling too long. You glance up. The stained glass windows glow with morning sun, washing the walls in shifting reds and blues. The patterns seem to move. Or maybe you're just still dizzy from the incense. A monk hands you a small piece of bread. You chew it slowly, unleavened, dry. But in the context of this space, this light, this sound, this silence, it feels significant. Even the smallest act becomes ritualized, heavy with meaning. Many medieval churchgoers weren't literate. They didn't read scripture. They experienced it through statues, chants, pageantry, relics, and the undeniable sensory theater of it all. One fringed church in southern France was built over a cave. The priest believed the earth's sacred breath rose through the floor, and during Mass, he insisted on keeping all doors sealed. Parishioners would often sway, faint, or weep uncontrollably. He claimed it was divine presence. The local midwife suspected mold. Regardless, people returned. Again and again. Because in a world that was grimy, chaotic, and loud, the church offered a different reality. A place of ordered space, rhythmic speech, colored light, sweet smoke, and structured time. Even fasting, a common devotional act, could induce altered states. After days without food, worshippers reported visions, emotional surges, or a profound sense of disconnection from the physical world. Not to mention dizziness. So much dizziness. Some even combined flagellation with meditation, a risky blend of endorphin rush, blood loss, and spiritual fervor. One penitent monk reportedly had a full conversation with the Virgin Mary about garden vegetables. He described her as firmly pro-beetroot. Not everyone experienced these highs the same way. Some felt only peace. Others saw colors where there were none. Others still just appreciated the excuse to sit down quietly and not be asked about crops. But the church knew the power of experience, of walking into a sacred space and being overwhelmed, not by theology, but by feeling. Even today, there's something undeniably hypnotic about stepping into an old cathedral. The cool air, the distant echo, the faint smell of candle smoke absorbed into a 1,000-year-old altar. You lean back on your bench. The monks continue their chant. The incense still curls in gentle ribbons toward the vaulted ceiling. Outside, the bells begin to ring the hour, slow, resonant, shaking the room like a heartbeat. And you think, this is the most sober you've felt in days. And yet, not quite. Because some highs don't come from what you swallow or smoke. Some come from ritual, repetition, reverence. From stepping out of the ordinary and into the rhythm of something ancient, slow, and bigger than your sore knees and crumb-covered tunic. you close your eyes, and for the first time in hours, you feel grounded and lifted. At the same time, you're in the middle of a festival, and everything smells like roasted meat, sweat, and misplaced decisions. Colorful flags flap overhead, children run in chaotic spirals, and a juggler has just accidentally set part of his pants on fire. No one seems alarmed, because this is Midsummer's Eve, and anything goes tonight, including, apparently, getting blissfully out of your mind on festival fumes and firelight. Medieval festivals weren't just about dancing or feasting. They were carefully designed acts of collective release. The calendar was rigid, the seasons harsh, and life, let's be honest, mostly mud and obligation. But a handful of days each year, you got to be someone else, or no one at all. And sometimes, with the help of smoke, song, and questionable beverages, you got a little bit high. Let's take a walk. Over by the bonfire, someone's tossing herbs into the flames, mugwort, juniper, maybe a little hemp if they're feeling bold. The scent hits you like memory and magic. It fills your lungs, settles in your chest, and suddenly the stars seem much too close for comfort. Historians still argue whether festival highs were deliberate or just an accident of too much food, too little water, and a cultural commitment to never refusing a cup. But look around. People are dancing in circles, laughing too loud, and swearing that the moon has eyes. You're not ruling it out. In many regions, festivals included ritual burning of herbs meant to cleanse the air and protect against evil spirits. The side effect? A large group of underfed villagers breathing deeply around a huge fire fueled by mildly psychoactive plants. Oops! Add in drumming, chanting, chanty singing, and a lot of spinning, and you've got yourself a recipe for trance states, especially if your brain has spent the past 364 days staring at soil. You watch as two women spin hand in hand, laughing so hard they collapse into the grass. One of them says the ground is pulsing like bread dough. The other just nods solemnly and declares herself the queen of straw. It's hard to argue with her. This wasn't unusual. In fact, festival highs were a communal expectation, even if no one named it, even if no one prepared for it. People wanted to feel lifted, out of grief, out of debt, out of the same daily soup of goats, taxes, and backaches. So they danced until they couldn't feel their feet. They wore masks and shouted nonsense, and claimed for just one day they didn't have to be themselves. One fringe celebration in Flanders included a ritual where villagers lay on the earth and listened to the worms whisper secrets. Was it symbolic? A joke? A mild group hallucination from drinking fermented beet cordial? Who can say? But it happened. Year after year. You take a sip from a shared cup passed your way. It tastes like wine, but also like flowers and something tingly. You're not entirely sure if your teeth are supposed to feel this aware. You set the cup down. Behind you, a man with bells on his elbows begins reciting poetry to a hedgehog. The hedgehog seems unimpressed. And yet, somehow, everything makes sense. These festivals weren't private highs. They were shared illusions. Everyone agreed to the magic. The lines blurred between sense and nonsense, dream and duty, the sacred and the ridiculous. And no one questioned it. Because the next day they'd go back to being farmers and cobblers and coopers, back to calloused hands and aching backs. But for now, they were witnesses to wonder. You lean against a haystack as fireworks. Wait, no, that's just someone lighting cheese on fire again. Flare in the distance. Someone starts singing. You join in. You don't know the words, but the melody finds your throat anyway. Because sometimes the euphoria isn't chemical. It's collective. It's the safety of joyful anonymity. It's the rush of being part of something messy, temporary, and gloriously unrepeatable. A medieval rave without the neon. You lie back in the grass. The stars spin a little. The music fades and rises again like breath. Somewhere a goat is wearing a hat. You have questions, but they don't feel urgent. And that's the point. The high is gentle, ambient, communal. Tomorrow, your knees will hurt. The ale will taste sour. The hedgehog will still be unimpressed. But tonight, you floated. Just a little. And that was enough. You're walking home through the dark, and the moon hangs heavy, huge and yellow like a wheel of cheese that's seen things. Your boots squelch softly in the mud, but you don't mind. Your head feels full of cotton and candlelight. Somewhere behind you, someone is still singing about a goose who married a bishop. Let them. Because you, dear wanderer, are drifting down from the strange little heights of medieval euphoria. And not all of it came from herbs, or wine, or ointments best applied where the sun doesn't shine. Some came from pure exhaustion. Let's talk about sleep deprivation, and how not sleeping long enough could actually lead people to feel high. Imagine fasting for 3 days, walking 20 miles, praying all night, then collapsing in a tiny wooden cell lit by one stuttering flame. It's no wonder people claim to see angels, ghosts, or their long-dead Aunt Mildred critiquing their posture. Medieval penitents, pilgrims and flagellants often pushed their bodies to the edge of collapse, seeking purification or enlightenment. And on the way, they stumbled into altered states, dizzy clarity, emotional surges, weird little episodes of bliss or terror. Historians still argue whether these episodes were divine revelations, psychological breaks, or just the human brain trying to stay upright on 3 hours of sleep and a diet of pickled turnips. But for those who lived it, it felt real, powerful, sacred. Sleep wasn't consistent in the Middle Ages. People often practiced segmented sleep, 2 chunks of rest, split by a quiet candlelit hour in the middle of the night. During this watch, they might pray, write, make love, or just sit and think in that strange liminal space between dreams and dawn. Some claimed this midnight hour held special clarity, as if the mind, briefly unhooked from the rhythm of daylight, opened a secret door. And then there were the insomniacs, the anxious, the grieving, the night watchers. These people knew that prolonged wakefulness sometimes led to moments of eerie lucidity, when thoughts flowed like silver and the veil between here and not here thinned. A blacksmith in Kent once wrote, "On the 3rd night without rest, I heard the church bell speak my name." He later apologized to the bell. But still, you keep walking. The air is crisp now, with that wet hay smell that only exists between 2 and 4 in the morning. A fox darts across your path. You stop. It stops. You lock eyes. For a second, you understand each other completely. Then it runs off, probably to do something majestic and illegal. Not all medieval highs came from potions or piety. Some came from the body betraying itself gently, slipping into altered consciousness because life was too hard, too busy, too hungry, too loud. And in that threshold between breaking and being broken, something shimmering took shape. A small euphoria, a grace, maybe not divine, maybe not safe, but real. You arrive at your doorway, your knees ache, your feet protest, your head hums with the residue of firelight, laughter, spices, and song. You step inside. The world is quiet again. No feathers, no chanting, no singing hedgehogs or glowing saints. Just you, and your breath, and a bed that hasn't been this inviting in weeks. You lie down. The straw mattress creaks beneath you. The ceiling is a patchwork of shadow and slats. Your heart slows, and in the stillness you realize something. You've been to places few have seen, Not just taverns and temples, but states of mind crafted from herb and hunger, ritual and rhythm, fatigue and faith. And now, finally, you come down, slowly, softly, gently. And now, as your breath settles and your limbs melt into the familiar weight of rest, you feel the echo of every fire, every whisper, every peculiar little journey we've taken tonight. The world of the medieval mind was many things, rough, radiant, ridiculous. But above all, it was curious. People reached for transcendence with whatever they had: a mug of spiced wine, a scrap of sacred herb, the hush of midnight prayers. They didn't always understand what was happening. But then again, do we? You imagine the stars outside, still turning. The moon has moved on, quieter now, a little further west. Somewhere, in a thatched roof cottage, or the stone quiet of a cloister, someone else is dreaming, or drifting, or watching the shadows dance on their ceiling like old friends. And you've wandered a dozen mindscapes, all without leaving your blanket. Let the last remnants of sound slip away. Let your breath deepen. Let your body rest. You're safe here, wrapped in silence and softened by the distant laughter of people who once danced with herbs in their boots and visions in their eyes. Tomorrow will come, but tonight you float, weightless, timeless, held.